Alright, so I'm going to change my screen from, actually no, let's just keep it here at Maya Classic. I don't mind having the time slider here. Okay, so in Maya you have a few different lights, and first thing that we need to do when we get ready to set up our render is to set our projects. Now, we all should be setting our projects before we even have this character on the scene, on the screen, but for those of you who forget how to set your project, I'll show you how and why. So let's explain the why first. If I click on Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, you can see right here the path. All of my renders, which are images that allow me to see this entire composition in a QuickTime, it's going right here to Student, G-Star, Desktop, Me, Bouncing Ball, Images. Okay? So if I wanted my renders to go to a different location, I can go to File, Set Projects, Me, and then let's go to Bouncing Ball, and let's say I wanted to go right here to Render Data. Click Open, and then I'll click on Create Default Workspace. Now you could see that the path is gone to Me, Bouncing Ball, Render Data, Images. Okay? Now first thing that we need to do is change the file name prefix. So I'm going to call this my initials and then B-ball. Alright. And then the image format, we'll change that to Targa. So TGA. Alright. Now the frame/animation extension, we'll change this to name.number.extension. Okay. And now we'll scroll on down, and we're going to change the end frame. Okay, so the end frame, I believe for my animation, is at frame, let's see here, I think it's frame 60, let's see, if I just click on the ball, it'll tell me, frame 74. So change the end frame to frame 74. Scroll down, and my renderable camera is going to be my camera 1. My presets will be, let's go HD 1080, and we'll keep the resolution, let's change it to like 100. Okay. Now all the way at the bottom it says render options. We're going to click on that little tab there and turn off enable default light. Okay? So we don't want any other light source to be in there. Maya software is the rendering engine that we'll be using. We click on that tab and it says edge anti-aliasing. You guys probably remember like Mario Brothers, how the edges of that character were really blocky, and now if you look at it, it's really smart, really sharp and smooth. It's called anti-aliasing. It's a stair-stepping. So we'll change that to highest quality, and we're finished. So if I go back to the comment tab, I'm going to render everything going into my render data images folder. So if I close this, oops, and this is my camera 1 that I'm looking through right now. So if I click panels, perspective, camera 1, this is a camera 1. Now in order to create a camera, and let me just change this back to my perspective. So this is my perspective camera, and it says perspective because it's right there. I'm going to create a new camera, so I'll go to create, cameras, camera, and you're going to notice that this little camera pops up right there. So I'll click, with this new camera selected, I'm going to rename it, and I will call it R underscore cam, render cam. Alright? I'll just call it RNDR, render cam. And I'll go back to my Windows, rendering editors, render settings, and I'll change my renderable camera 1 to my render cam. Alright? It's really important that we try not to, you know, like tumble around through that render camera. Alright? So I'm going to click on Panels, Perspective, Render Cam. Now I'm actually looking through that render camera. Okay. So now I'm looking at my render camera and I'm going to turn on my resolution gate. What that allows me to see is the my shot, right? So I'll take that floor. I think I'm going to scale it out just a little bit more. Okay, so I want to set this camera up, and I don't want to touch it once it's finished, once I set it up. Alright, so if I click on the ball, I'll go to frame 1, and I want to kind of crop this. So I don't want the ball to be on the screen. Alright, so I want the ball to start off there, and then it bounces, so maybe...
When you don't go to Geico.com, car insurance can seem intense. Like,
let's see here. I will crop this a little more. So first bounce is there, goes up, and then it rolls. Alright? So let's do this. Crop it a little bit more. So I'll take this position at frame 1 and move it over, press S. So let's do this. I'll crop in a little bit more. Start my frame 1 and I'll move it up and to the left. Alright, so I'm just pretty much setting up my camera so that the ball either stays on the screen or it rolls off. And let me have it stay on the screen. Right there. So now that I'm still looking through my render camera, I'm going to click on this little icon here, which says select camera, and you're going to notice that this gray box turns white. Okay, so it turns white. And in my channel box editor, it tells me that I have my render cam selected. So in this render camera, I'm going to left mouse click, drag until I get to the scale, right mouse click, and go to lock selected. Alright, so you can see that there's like this little gray bar right there. That means I can't zoom in, I can't zoom out, I can't even tumble. Right? I'm happy with this camera. Now I can go into my panels, perspective, and then perspective view. Alright, cool. So the perspective view allows me to, you know, tumble around, look at certain things, and my render camera is locked. Okay? Alright, sweet. So first thing that we need to do is explore a few light sources. Okay? Now, let me go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render View. Alright. Now in our render view, you have a few different things up here. You have this button here. This is our slate. It's like, you know, in movies when they say scene 2, action, whatever, right? This is the rendering a certain region, so I can drag like that and then render that region. You see? You just render that, or I can render everything. Okay? Now this right here is what we call a snapshot. A snapshot takes a snapshot of the ball. and we want it to say Maya software. Alright, now if we click on render, snapshot, let's go render, so render cam, we get this scene that's completely black. And the reason why it's completely black is because we told in our render settings, we said that we wanted to turn off the default light source. Okay, so if this was turned on and we rendered, you'll see this kind of very generic light. Okay, so this right here isn't necessarily a shadow because shadows are cast onto the floor. This is what we just consider shading. Okay, so every light source that we create, we have the ability to turn shadows off and on. Alright, so I'm going to create like a little backdrop. So I'll go to create polygon plane, and I'll do this. Make it really big. I'll move it this way. I'll rotate it towards me. Oops, wrong way. Make that 90 degrees. Oops. Negative 90. Okay, well, let's do that. Shoot 90 degrees. Okay, and I'll move it up. Press R, scale it wide. I'll do this. So if I go to panels, perspective, render cam 1, this is what I see in my render cam. So I'm going to move it up like that. Okay, and scale it down. So I'm kind of creating like a backdrop, okay? Alright. Next thing I want to do is create a light source. Now, you have several different light sources, okay? You have like an area light, you have all sorts of lights. So I'll start off with a directional light. So you can click on create light, directional light, and if I move this up, press R to scale it big. Whatever direction that these arrows are facing is the direction of the light source. So let's move it right here. And so think about the arrows as like time of day. If the arrows are low and in this shot, okay, we're going to have, now I'll click on render, and I'm going to render it from the render cam. You see? This is what we get. Let me scale this down a little bit. Alright. If I change the angle of this and then click on this button right here, you can see that it changes the time of day, right? And this button right here allows you to keep the image. I like to keep the image so I can compare. Right, so if I change this angle to something like this, and then click render, you see I get something totally different. And then I'm going to keep that image, and now I can compare images. You see, I can compare. Like, oh, I don't like that one too much. This one's much better. Now, on this particular light source, if I press Control A, it's going to take me directly into my attribute editor, and I can change the intensity of the light, and I'm going to enable the depth map shadows. Okay, so the moment I enable depth map shadows and click render, you can see now I have a shadow. Okay, now we can change the resolution to say 3000 and get a much sharper edge. Okay, if I change the filter size to something like 3, I can render this particular region so I don't have to wait for my render to come back, and click here. and look at the results. So if I click on keep image, right, and if I change the resolution back to, what was it, like 300 or something like that, and render that region, I can look at the difference and keep the image. So now you can see the quality, right? So a higher resolution is going to give me better looking shadow. And I wouldn't crank it up so much, because now you're going to realize that the render time went from 1 second to 2 seconds on 3000. Let's see what happens if I render it at 8000 resolution. Sometimes you won't see a huge difference in the render quality. So they both took 4 seconds, and one of them is no different than the other. So I'll keep that about, let's make it 3000. Okay. Alright, now, so this is the directional light. It's, you know, pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to delete this and create an area light. And then I'll go into maybe some more customizations. Actually, let's do the spotlight first. So spotlight, I'm going to move it directly over this object, right? Directly over. And sometimes you can get what we call an interactive preview. So if I press 7, you can see that spotlight, right? If I look at my channel box editor, I'm sorry, my attribute editor, I can change the cone angle, so you get something really, you know, like dramatic effect. If I change the penumbra angle, it's going to be how soft the edges are, right? And so you can kind of go outward and then go inward. So change that back to 0. And then the drop-off angle is how much light is actually being influenced in that particular area. You see? So you can change the drop-off and, you know, change your penumbra angle. You can change the cone angle as well. Alright? So just a few tricks. Now, since this object is moving, right, if I go to my render view and click render, my render camera, it looks really cool like this, right? But the moment I move the ball to the left, we can no longer see that particular, we can't see the ball. And we don't want to animate our light source, you know, hovering over that. Otherwise it's not going to look really good. Okay, so now after I press delete, I can't see my ball anymore, so I'm going to press 5, which takes me back to shading mode. And the next light I want to explore with you is the ambient light. Now the ambient light creates just a single light source, and it lights every single thing. So if I click render, and then go to my render cam, see? Pretty straightforward. Now again, under the shadows, I can turn on use ray trace shadows, and I have to kind of dial in the shadow radius. So let's try 0.5. See if we get anything. Let's increase the shadow rays to something like 10. It kind of takes some fine tuning. I don't really like to use the area light for shadows. So let's probably increase the shadow radius. And it's not even giving me the desired result. So you can probably understand the reason why I have a little bit of frustration using the ambient light to create shadows. Most times if I would use an ambient light, it's rare, I'll turn off the use ray trace shadows, and I'll use a directional light. Right, so I'll use a directional light. Scale the sky up and turn on the use depth map shadows. Crank that up to about 1,000, and I'll render it again. See, so you can use two lights together. So it's actually a pretty nice effect. It's not, the ball isn't too saturated. If I zoom in and look at the shadows, you can see it looks a little crunchy. So I would change the resolution of the area light. So let's make that say 2000. I'll render it again. And it looks a little bit better. This screen resolution, if I click that 1:1 display, this is actually how I'm going to see my ball, because it is 1080p. Alright, so let me close that. Alright, so this is a really good setup, right? Not really good, but it's pretty basic. You know, you have your area light, your ambient light to create this really neutral effect. Alright, it lights everything in the scene, and then we have a light source. Now, you can change, let's say, the ambient light to a different color. So let's bring in something a little bit cooler. Let's try some blue values. Alright, and let me go back to my, this is a shortcut to go directly to your render view, this icon here. It'll just bring up your render view. If you click on this icon, it will actually render it. I like to click on this one first. Now I'll go back to render, render, and then go to my render camera. See, so now you kind of introduce some blues for the background, right? Alright, cooler colors. Okay, so I'm going to keep this particular setup, but I'm going to turn the intensity all the way to 0 and select this ambient light here. Change the intensity to 0, and I'm going to put both of these guys on their own layer. So if I press Control A, I'll go directly into my channel box editor, my channel box. I'll go to my display settings. I'm going to create a layer and rename this layer by double clicking it and call this outdoor light. Click save, and I'm going to hide that, okay, because I want to use that later for our demo. Now, for some of you guys that like to do something a little more creative and a little more labor intensive, we're going to go to Create Light, Area Light. So my area light, I'm going to scale it up and then rotate it. If I hold J and then hold left mouse click and drag, it's going to snap it at 45-degree angles. So if I move this light here, and let's get my ball in midair, right about here. Okay. So I'll take this light source and I'll go back to my render view, and let's render this. You can see that now it looks much different, right? This light source that I have here, if I bring it closer to the ball, I'm just going to render that region. You can see it's extremely bright. So the proximity of this ball to the light is going to change how bright it is. And so let's say if I moved it here and I rendered. So we can't see it on screen. I think this is when we start to see it on the screen in my Alright, so let's do that. Okay. Alright, so the moment this ball gets a little bit further away, say like at frame 74, so I'll go to my render cam. There's less influence of that white light on here than before. Alright? So that's something that we want to keep in mind. Right? Is the way that the light looks right here is going to look much different than the way it looks there. You see? So it's something that you want to keep in mind. So if you try to change the intensity of this light source right here, it's going to affect the way the light source is when it's over here. Okay? So let's introduce another light source. Same light, Control D, and let's try to make it all stylized, right? I think that's what the point of this example is, right? We want to make it stylized. So I have a white light that's on the left side of the ball. Maybe the light that's here, that's hitting this, I want to make it green. Go back to my render view. I'll press render, and there we go. Right? It's green. Now the issue with the area lights is that the light gets clipped right where that light source ends. You see? So I'm going to push this light source, and let me press 4 so you can see what I'm talking about. So that line that you see, this line right here is where the light is coming from. Everything on the right side of this area light is where it's clipping. That's why in our render view you see that really hard edge. Okay, so the way that we avoid that, so let me go back into my render camera view. I'll press 5. I'm going to move it beyond my screen. So I'll go back here and I'll press render again. And that hard line is starting to move, but I have to move it back a little bit further. Same thing with this guy. So I'll move it back further. Press render. I still could see it there. Maybe I will change the angle or move it up a little higher. Right? So let me move this out the way. So it takes a little bit of, you know, adjustments. I'm going to angle it downward like this. Let's see that. I'll move it up and I'll angle it that way. So let me go back into my perspective render cam and let's see what the results are. Alright. Not as bad. I get that line here, but we're going to keep moving forward. Alright? Because I said I would only take 5 minutes and it's well over 5 minutes. Alright, so I'll press Control D and let's add another light source from the top. Press E, I'll rotate it. Press W, I'll move it up. Now this particular light source, I'm going to make it pink. Like a pastel. I like to use like really soft colors sometimes. Okay. Now, I think one of the most important things that we sometimes forget are like the level of intensity of each light source. So sometimes, like all the lights are so intense, they get washed out. So I'm going to start with my main light source, and I want that main light source to be this pink one. Right? Alright, it looks red. But I don't want it to have so much influence on the scene like you guys see here. So I'll change the intensity to like 0.2. And when I render it now, not too bad. Okay. Now I'll introduce that next light source, right? The one we had earlier, which is the white, and I'm going to keep this image, right? So keep image is this one right here. And if you scrub through this little tab right here, it allows you to compare. I'll take that white source of light and I'll change it to 0.1. And let's see what that the contribution is on this one. Alright. Okay. Maybe 0.3. Okay. I like that. And let's take the next light, make its contribution 0.3, and see what happens. You see? So a little bit more dramatic. They're not all washing each other out. And again, I probably would move this light source a little further back so we don't see a lot of contribution. Now, if you guys know anything about like photography or have ever taken family pictures at like Macy's, they have a backlight as well, right? So they have a light that sometimes gives you this called, it's like a rim light. So I'm going to add a rim light, and I'll make this light source a little bit smaller. I'm going to make it yellow, and I'm going to make it really intense, just so that I could see the contribution to the scene. Let's go back here. I'll press render, and there we go. Now again, we could see that hard line there. It's because of the angle of this. So let me angle it that way. Move it up. Now press render. Right. So you can get really creative when it comes to your light sources. I'll move it here, and I'll put another light in the front. And let's make this one, I don't know, like this fuchsia color. It's all like sci-fi. You see? So it helps to soften some of that shadows of the really hard lines there. And again, I would, probably push and pull some of these area lights to the left so that we don't get that shadow here. Or maybe you like that shadow. I personally don't like that shadow here coming from this yellow light source. So I'll move it up higher and I'll change the angle. And then I'm going to add another light source to maybe the background, right? So I want this light source here to hit this wall. So I'll change it to maybe like dark gray. And let's see what we get. You see? All like the color contribution. So it makes for like a more dramatic look and effect in Pixar films, and there's other techniques called global illumination. So what global illumination is, and I'll do this relatively fast. I know I keep saying that, but it doesn't always work out that way. Alright, so let me change the color. Global illumination is what we see every single day. You have this globe that we all live in called Earth, and you have your sky. And so let's just say this is a cloud, and the colors from the cloud, the blues, are going to hit this character, and they're going to bounce off, and then they're going to go up back into the atmosphere, and they're going to die. right? And then it bounces off this thing, it goes up, and then that blue hits this, it leaves a little blue splotch there, and it goes up in the atmosphere. And then you have the contribution from the sun, right? So you have your sun right there, and then that yellow hits that, bounces off, and it sometimes even mixes with that blue, right? And then that bounces off, it hits there, and it mixes there, and it goes that way. And then you have the colors of the trees. Oops, wrong color. You have the colors of the trees. Right, so you have trees here. And then the light from that tree is hitting the ball, bouncing off. So you guys understand, right? These are what we call rays and point clouds. And when you have a scene, let's say from that movie Big Hero 6, where they use millions of rays to hit the characters, that's why it looks so beautiful. Like the colors were so vibrant, because you had this image that was wrapped around a dome and it would light our scene. So I'm going to render this particular one. Alright, I kind of like it. Shadows aren't the best, but I'm actually going to add that directional light in the scene so I can have a shadow. So I'll click here. I'm actually going to delete I'm going to delete that area light, and I'm going to use that directional light, and let's go back into my render view. I'll click render one more time, and where's my shadows? Let's get my shadows going. Let's go back to my attribute editor, use depth map shadows. I'll press render, and okay, so we can't see the shadow because I have all of these area lights in my screen and they all are casting shadows. So what I'm going to do is hold shift and select all of my area lights, all the lights in my scene except my directional light. So I have all my lights in my scene. And I'm going to go to Windows, Relationship Editors, and I'm sorry, Windows, General Editors, and I think it is the Component Editor. Nope, that's not it. Windows, General Editors. Give me a second. Attribute editor, is that it? Sometimes it takes me a little bit. Attribute spreadsheet. Okay. Attribute spreadsheet. So I have all my lights selected here, you see. I'll click on render, or let's click all. And I'm looking for shadows. Where are you at? So let me go here to this little tab. Shadows. Okay. Where are you at? Let's see. Sometimes it takes me a little while. I could go into the attribute editor and turn them off one at a time if I wanted to. But sometimes it's easier to do it this way. But okay, so I'm gonna click on Shape Keyable, and it says Use Ray Trace Shadows. All I have to do is click on that, press 0, and it turns all of the shadows off. So now I'm only going to get a shadow from that object here. Oh, and the intensity. There we go. That's why. The intensity was off. Okay, so it's kind of washing out my entire scene. 0.4. Let's render that. Alright, let's change it to 0.1. Alright. And let's change the resolution up. Let's try 3000. Change the filter size to 3. So now I'm looking at the shadow, right? I want to see a little bit darker. Bias. Let's change that to 0.5. Alright, so it's actually making it softer. Fog intensity, filter size. Let's go ahead and crank that up. Let's see what we get. So the higher that number, the softer the shadow. So let's try 0.05. So the lowest is actually 1. I think that's probably the best that we're going to get with that shadow. Let me change. I'm really not happy with that. Let me turn this off and let me use ray trace shadows. Let's try 0.1. Not getting what I want. Shadow rays, let's change it to 3. Let's crank this up and see what we get. Not really getting the results that I want. So I just turn on the use depth map shadows, and that's probably the best I'm going to get in terms of the shadows, and then maybe I'll increase the intensity of that light source. And alright, we'll call it a day. I think that's pretty good. Alright, so now that I have my lighting the way I want it to be, okay, I set my scene, right? So I went to my render settings, and it's going to render everything in my render data images. I'll close this. Now on the upper left hand side, we're going to click on rendering. We'll click render, batch render, and I'll press continue. You'll see on the bottom side here in your command line, if I click on this little guy here, it tells me that it is beginning the process of rendering with Maya software. Okay, so I'll stop this tutorial now, and you actually can see what's going on. So see, it's rendering frame 1, and now it's rendering frame 2, and then it starts to render frame 3, and you can see it says rendering done, % of rendering done. So it goes from 1% to 100%, and then it completes frame 1. It goes from 1% to 100% and finishes rendering frame 2. So now I'm at frame 6, going to frame 74. So it's going to take some time. Alright, so I'll stop this, and the next video will be compositing in After Effects.